Viridian, the Green Guide by My Head in the Clouds, Not Coming Down. Chapter 11. Anxiety. Izuku had to pause in the middle of putting on his school uniform as the weight of what he had done last night came crashing down on him. He had been too tired last night to really process what had happened, but now the panic was back with a vengeance. He'd punched Eraserhead. Eraser had to be so mad at him. He'd just been trying to get Izuku to the hospital, but when he'd panicked about what would happen if they figured out who he was, which meant that Mom would figure out what he'd been doing, and she would be so worried and scared, and he really didn't want to do that to her. So he had to get away. But if he wanted to get away, he had to make Eraser let go of him. He really wasn't thinking that clearly, and the first stupid thought he had was to punch a hero in the nose. Whatever respect Eraser had for him was gone. Not that he could have gained that much considering that Izuku was a quirkless middle schooler who couldn't even aim his slingshot correctly. But that didn't matter because it was gone now, and he was never getting it back. "Good work, Doku," his inner Kacchan said. "You managed to fuck things up even worse than you usually do." He didn't want to have to face Eraserhead again. Maybe he would die before he had to see him. That'd be good. Maybe he would be able to go out tonight and there would be some villain attack. Maybe even another trigger villain, and Izuku would just step in instead of getting a hero, and then it'd all be over quickly, and he wouldn't have to deal with Eraser's anger, or Amplifier's disappointment, or Mom's worry, or Kacchan's. Izuku shook his head forcefully. He wasn't supposed to be thinking things like that. Besides, with his luck, that probably wouldn't work anyways. Even if everything went well and he died, the fact that he didn't go get a hero for such a big villain would be suspicious. And then what would happen if they realized he'd wanted to? And then they looked into Kacchan and he wouldn't be able to go to Yue, and it would all be Izuku's fault. Izuku shook his head again and winced as he realized he had a headache he'd been ignoring. His ribs hurt more than his head did, though. He knew he probably had a little concussion. But it was nothing compared to that time Kacchan had pushed him off the slide on accident, and he'd hit his head. So Izuku wasn't that worried. He shrugged off his shirt so he could put some cream on his ribs, tensing as the cold cream hit his skin. After that, he finished getting dressed and grabbed his backpack. He didn't want to be late for school. Katsuki tuned out the extras that surrounded him as he ate his lunch. The old hag had packed an extra spicy curry today, so he knew it was going to be good. "Hey, look, guys, it's Doku," one of the extras at another table called out. And sure enough, Katsuki looked up as Doku walked into the cafeteria with his shoulders hunched. The extras sitting at his table looked to see how he'd react, but he just scoffed and turned back to his lunch. Heroes didn't pick on their classmates, no matter how much they deserved it. And he was going to be the best hero. "What's up, Doku?" the extra with extendable fingers asked. "Still alive?" A small group of their classmates had surrounded Doku at this point, and even some extras at Katsuki's table had gotten up to go join the fun. The extras were grinning and laughing like Fingers had just made the funniest joke on earth. But Doku himself was just staring silently at the ground. "Why so quiet?" asked another extra. This one, with boulders for hair, asked. "Finally realized that no one cares what you had to say?" Well, that might be true, but it probably wasn't very nice to say. Katsuki knew he was acting like a bit of a hypocrite. It wasn't like anything they were saying to Doku was new. Katsuki himself had always prided himself on being especially creative with his insults, after all. So, in comparison, these extras' insults were boring, and almost as plain as Doku's face. So, it wasn't like the extras were saying anything that Doku hadn't heard before, or anything that he hadn't heard Katsuki himself say. But Katsuki wanted to be like All Might, which meant that he wasn't going to waste his time insulting people anymore. His classmates didn't have any hope of being heroes, though, so was it okay for them to insult Doku, right? Or was that wrong too? What would All Might do if he was here? Boulders had taken that moment to punch Deku in the ribs, making him gasp in pain. Either Boulders had gotten stronger, or Doku already had sore ribs. Had some of the other extras given him a beating when Katsuki wasn't looking? Thinking back, Doku had been walking kind of funny all day, like he was sore or something, and goodness knows the nerd wasn't athletic enough to be sore from exercise. Hey, save some of that air for those who deserve it, nerd. Katsuki looked at some of the teachers who were eating in the small table in the corner. They had to know what was happening. It wasn't like these extras were being quiet. So why weren't they doing anything? Why hadn't they ever done anything? Wasn't it their job to keep kids from getting hurt or something? What would All Might do if he were one of them? He'd probably tell the kids off for being unheroic, but the teachers weren't doing that. Katsuki watched them as the extras kept insulting Doku, and one of them even glanced over and chuckled before turning back to his lunch. Well, it was normal, but it didn't seem right. Why wasn't anyone doing anything? Why wasn't he doing anything? And that thought made Katsuki stop. Was he supposed to step in? All Might probably would, but that brought him back to the whole hypocrisy thing. What gives him the right to step in and protect Doku when, just a month ago, he was one of the ones... Well, maybe attacking him wasn't quite the right way to phrase it, but still, even if he were to step in, Doku probably wouldn't trust him at all. All the useless extras might think that Katsuki was admitting that Doku was better than him, or that he was weak. The curry turned to sawdust in his mouth. Spicy sawdust, but still flavorless as Doku silently picked up the remains of his lunch off the floor and threw them away after one of the extras had knocked it out of his hands. He didn't really know how to describe what he was feeling. He just knew that he didn't like it. He was the best. He'd always been the best. And if there was anything the best wasn't, it was a coward. So this annoying feeling couldn't be fear, could it? Izuku walked through the hardware store much more confidently this time, now that he actually knew what he was looking for and how to find it. He should have just picked up his pipes when he left last night's fight, but even though the concussion hadn't been that bad, both it and the pain from being thrown into the wall made it difficult to focus on anything besides getting away so Eraser didn't tell Mom about his vigilantism, which meant that the pipes had been left to rot among all the other garbage in that alley, and Izuku needed to replace them. He couldn't bring himself to regret giving them to Eraser, though. If he kept using his capture weapon, there was a good chance that he would have gotten hurt. So the pipes were obviously the better option. Not that Eraser's capture weapon was bad. It was actually really cool how it worked against a lot of villains, so he didn't hurt them any more than he had to, and... Oh, right. Izuku was here to get pipes. He should probably buy a few backups to keep in his closet, too, just in case he ever lost them again. Yeah, that was a good idea. And zip ties. It wasn't a big problem when he helped heroes, but Izuku had been having problems restraining the small-time villains that he was able to take down on his own. Most of the time he was able to find some kind of rope or cloth to tie him up, but it would be nice not to have to worry about that anymore. Izuku was extremely proud of himself when he managed to get to the checkout stand with only items on his list. Unlike last time when he ended up with a lot of other stuff too. To his surprise, his cashier was the kid with the electricity quirk he'd talked to last time. What was his name again? Oh, right. Kaminari. Hey, dude. Kaminari smiled as Izuku put his basket down on the counter. Nice to see you back here. Thanks, Izuku said. How is your electricity training coming? Were any of the electricians willing to teach you? Kaminari nodded eagerly. One of them actually offered to make me a temporary apprentice. I'm gonna learn all the basics about how circuits work and stuff. I didn't realize that my quirk might not be effective against a flying villain. Isn't that insane? Izuku nodded. It was one of the main limitations of electric heroes. They couldn't actually electrocute something that wasn't grounded. But the way he was talking about villains specifically. Are you going to be a hero? Kaminari shrugged and smiled. Yeah, that was the hope. My quirk is flashy enough for it, so it's just a question of if I'm actually smart enough to get in. Cash your card. Izuku smiled encouragingly as he handed over a handful of cash. You can do it. Kaminari put the pipes and the zip ties in a plastic bag. Thanks, dude. I'm sure gonna try. Hey, what are you making anyways? You were buying pipes last time. Izuku didn't know how to respond to that, so he just shrugged. Kaminari laughed. Alright, keep your secrets, dude. Good luck with whatever it is, though. Izuku nodded. And good luck with your apprenticeship. See you later. Izuku had never been lucky. In fact, he'd been mostly the opposite. But he was grateful for Kaminari's words anyways. He'd run into a